4, 3, 2, 1. Liftoff. Roger, liftoff.
It has been over half a century since NASA successfully accomplished the remarkable feat of landing on the moon. Surprisingly, despite the advancements in technology and space exploration, NASA has not made any significant endeavors to revisit this captivating celestial body. This begs the question of whether this decision is a mere oversight or a deliberate choice. Join us as we shed light on the potential reasons why NASA never wanted to return to the moon after the Apollo missions. So, why are we even talking about the moon? The year 1969 marked a significant turning point in the history of mankind with the groundbreaking Apollo 11 mission, which saw humans set foot on another celestial body for the very first time. The subsequent 3 years witnessed the culmination of 6 Apollo missions, resulting in a total of 12 astronauts landing on the lunar surface. However, despite the triumphant return of Apollo 17 in December 1972, NASA indirectly made the puzzling decision to discontinue their lunar expeditions, leaving many to question the rationale behind this choice. Today, it is the actual moon landing that remains etched in the memories of most people. However, few realize the countless test flights and Apollo missions that were conducted prior to that historic moment. In March 1969, an almost forgotten climax occurred when the Apollo 8 astronauts became the first humans to lay eyes on the dark side of the moon. This remarkable achievement paved the way for future missions and ultimately set the stage for the monumental event that would capture the world's attention, the landing of the first humans on the moon. In the early 1960s, plans were being developed in the United States to embark on an extraordinary mission of sending humans to the moon. The public became aware of these plans when President John F. Kennedy delivered a historic address to Congress on May 25, 1961.
Now it is time to take longer strides. Time for this nation to take a clearly leading role in space achievement.
Among his remarks, Kennedy boldly proclaimed his belief that the nation would commit itself to the daring goal of reaching the moon before the end of the decade. However, President Kennedy remained resolute in his commitment to the lunar program, and just 18 months later, Apollo 7 successfully orbited the Earth with a human crew on board. The quest to be the first to set foot on the lunar surface became a prestigious goal, serving as a means for the U.S. to redeem itself in the world race for space dominance. However, just weeks before Kennedy's speech, the U.S. faced a setback when Russia successfully sent Yuri Gagarin into space aboard a space capsule. Gagarin became the first human to orbit the Earth and return safely, earning Russia the esteemed title of First Man in Space. This achievement did not sit well with the United States, as they sought to secure their own significant title and record in space exploration, the first man on the moon. The objective of this ambitious mission was to not only land a man on the moon, but also ensure his safe return to Earth. In December 1972, Apollo astronauts Eugene Cernan and Harrison Schmitt became the last humans to step foot on the moon. It has been over 50 years since any human has traveled to the moon, marking a significant milestone in space exploration. Moon missions are far too expensive. One of the main factors contributing to the alleged abandonment of the Apollo program was the insufficient financial support from the federal government. The exorbitant expenses involved in the mission to the moon during the 1960s placed a heavy burden on NASA's budget. The entire Apollo program, spanning from 1961 to 1972, incurred a cost surpassing $25 billion, which, when adjusted for inflation, could amount to over $150 billion. This made Apollo one of the most financially demanding government initiatives in history during that period. Despite the tremendous monetary investment, the Apollo program yielded invaluable scientific and engineering knowledge, while also securing a significant victory for the United States over the Soviet Union in the intense competition of the space race. After more than a decade of substantial increases in NASA's funding to achieve the objective of reaching the moon, both taxpayers and politicians gradually lost interest in continuing to finance costly human missions to the moon. The denial of NASA's budget requests meant that the dream of establishing a sustained human lunar outpost became unattainable. Without the necessary financial backing or a strong national mandate, further exploration of the moon had to be put on hold. This decision forced NASA to realign its efforts towards more cost-effective space missions. The idea of sending people back to the moon and establishing a permanent presence there was deemed too expensive given the new budgetary constraints. During the 1970s, the U.S. economy faced significant significant challenges that caused it to slow down considerably. The main culprits were the oil crises and inflation, which had a profound impact on various sectors. As a result, the government was under immense pressure to curb spending across the board. In this light, NASA's ambitious plans for new moon programs were met with disappointment, as their budget requests were denied. Instead, the government prioritized social programs within the country, diverting funds away from space exploration. With limited funds available and a shift in national priorities, the dream of returning to the moon and establishing a human outpost had to be abandoned in favor of more financially feasible space missions. Fear of the unknown. Astronauts could suffer heart risks, lumpy gravity, crater, and others. One of the primary concerns revolved around the potential health risks associated with long-term exposure to low gravity and increased radiation levels. During the Apollo missions, astronauts only spent a maximum of 3 days on the lunar surface, which made it difficult to ascertain the effects that months or even years of living in such an environment would have on the human body. The prospect of extended missions was viewed as akin to subjecting the crew to a planetary quarantine, posing serious threats to their well-being and safety. NASA was also hesitant about extended lunar habitation due to the significant risks and uncertainties involved. Although the Apollo missions demonstrated that humans could successfully visit the moon for short durations, the daunting task of sustaining life in such an inhospitable environment presented extensive technological challenges that were not yet fully comprehended or resolved. Considering the multitude of health, engineering, and operational unknowns, NASA deemed it necessary to conduct further scientific research before committing to permanently placing humans on the moon. It was evident that extended lunar missions were far too risky to attempt without thorough testing and demonstrations using automated probes. Unfortunately, the funding required for such extensive research and development was not available after the Apollo missions, making the goal of lunar colonization even more challenging to achieve. Furthermore, the lunar conditions themselves were incredibly hostile and presented numerous risks. The extreme temperatures, lack of atmosphere, and the constant threat of micrometeoroids posed great dangers to any infrastructure or habitat placed on the moon's surface. The possibility of equipment failures or structural damage was a constant concern, as such incidents could jeopardize human life. Unfortunately, the limited availability of emergency backup options left little room for error or unforeseen circumstances. Furthermore, the challenges of living on the moon extended beyond engineering difficulties. One major concern was how to construct habitats that could provide sufficient protection from the harsh lunar environment. Additionally, the development of autonomous life support systems was necessary to sustain human life on the moon. Another significant obstacle was the production of essential resources like oxygen, water, and fuel. These resources were vital for the survival and operation of any lunar outpost. In addition to the physical risks, isolation and confinement on the moon could also have detrimental effects on the mental health of crew members. The psychological dangers of stress and confinement were difficult to predict and manage, further complicating the prospect of long-term lunar missions. Moreover, the issue of transportation to the moon posed a significant hurdle. The establishment of an outpost on the lunar surface required the transportation of large payloads into lunar orbit. However, this task was hindered by the absence of rockets capable of carrying such enormous loads. The technology required for this endeavor was still in its infancy and had not yet been developed. Lack of sustained political support. One of the most notable aspects was that NASA's human spaceflight culture revolved entirely around the ambitious objective of landing astronauts on the moon by 1970, as per President Kennedy's challenge. This goal, which had united and energized the nation for over a decade, was successfully accomplished by 1972. However, with this primary mission fulfilled, NASA found itself lacking a clear direction and sense of purpose. The agency had to face the harsh fiscal realities and adapt to new mission priorities established by legislators and the White House. The transition from Apollo's focus on the moon to a new set of goals was a pivotal moment for NASA. Without a compelling national authority to continue exploring the lunar surface and extend the legacy of Apollo, the agency had to make a strategic shift. As a result, the political prioritization for human spaceflight shifted from the moon to low Earth orbit. This decision was met with disappointment by those who had advocated for the establishment of lunar colonies. Nevertheless, it was the new reality that that NASA had to embrace and operate within. Simultaneously, advocates for space exploration began highlighting alternative objectives such as the development of reusable space transportation systems, the establishment of space stations, the creation of new scientific instruments, and the execution of robotic planetary missions. Rather than simply repeating past achievements, NASA's leaders sought out new challenges and opportunities for advancement. NASA's shift away from the moon can also be attributed to a change in American space priorities during the post-Apollo era. With the success of the race to the moon, public enthusiasm for continued lunar settlement dwindled. This lack of consensus among the American population made it difficult to garner sustained public and political support for further lunar initiatives. Furthermore, the Nixon administration played a significant role in redirecting NASA's focus. They actively encouraged international cooperation in space exploration and promoted joint missions, exemplified by the Apollo-Soyuz test project. This shift towards collaboration not only fostered a sense of unity among nations, but also allowed for the sharing of resources and expertise, ultimately advancing the overall understanding and capabilities of space exploration. Now it's time for our subscribers' pick. There has been much speculation as to what lurks within the dark side of the moon, but some scientists have come out to say there was never a dark side. Notwithstanding, conspiracy theorists and believers of extraterrestrial life seem to have found something tangible to hold on to. Now take a look at this eerie figure displayed on your screen. This could be a sign that there is something going on the moon that we do not know about. Could the government be hiding something? What do you think of this? Let us know in the comments section. Public interest waned and moon dreams died. NASA budgets peaked in the late 1960s, giving way to precipitous declines. Without robust advocacy fueled by lunar triumphs, elected representatives saw little political capital in continued spending. Moon settlement projections were slashed, then shelved altogether. After NASA's final Apollo mission returned safely from the moon, it undoubtedly capped off an unprecedented era of exploration and national achievement. However, unknown to many, the golden age of lunar exploration was already coming to an end. Behind the scenes at NASA, budget cuts were looming as public interest in human spaceflight started to wane. Without robust ongoing support, visions of establishing permanent moon bases seemed destined to fade into obscurity. To fully understand why NASA would not return to the moon for decades, we must rewind back to that initial spark that lit the fire: national pride and Cold War competition driving the space race. It was this geopolitical rivalry with the Soviet Union throughout the 1960s that energized massive government funding and public enthusiasm for NASA's goals. With the historic 1969 landing of Apollo 11, the United States achieved President Kennedy's challenge of reaching the moon by the end of the decade. Ecstatic celebrations ensued across America. But in many ways, this triumphant success began sowing the seeds of NASA's lunar demise. You see, achieving the initial target of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to Earth had been NASA's sole directive for close to a decade. With this box checked so emphatically, the space agency struggled to articulate compelling new frontiers to capture the public's imagination in quite the same way. In reality, a significant portion of the American populace held reservations about the concept of embarking on a lunar expedition, expressing concerns over the excessive financial resources being allocated by the government towards space exploration. In mission control, NASA leaders were well aware that without capturing national attention, budgetary support could evaporate. They pushed ambitious long-term lunar habitation plans, hoping pandemic interest would translate into multi-billion-dollar commitments. But average citizens had moved on to new worldwide crises and cultural changes. With spectacles of moonwalks no longer dominating headlines, Americans shifted focus. For leaders in Washington assessing national spending priorities, spaceflight became an easy target as public championing dwindled. Going to the moon was no longer justified without both patriotic competition and mass popular support behind it. To the scientific community still harboring visions of lunar cities, this redirection stung. But for taxpayers losing interest amid challenging times, deferring further moonshots brought little complaint. NASA scrambled to recalibrate its human spaceflight strategy toward more sustainable yet less ambitious goals within tighter budgets. So while the initial spark of Apollo lit a flame in the heart of America and guided boots to the lunar surface, its intensity burned too bright too fast for long-term programs to remain politically viable. The magic and wonder of reaching such a milestone proved difficult to recreate on subsequent voyages. voyages. Without new national imperative and continued captivation, declining interest doomed hopes of staying to fully explore humanity's closest celestial neighbor. For NASA, redirecting exploration priorities was a matter of survival amid shifting political winds and public focus. The truth remains that the critical ongoing public advocacy and political will remain substantial in sustaining ambitious exploration programs. While Apollo achieved the incredible, enthusiastically funded short-term goals risked overshadowing longer-term potentials without ongoing inspiration. Operating the Saturn V was costly. The Saturn V rocket, a monumental feat of engineering, had the ability to transport the massive Apollo command and lander modules to the moon in a single journey. Each journey could span 240,000 miles. However, operating the Saturn V was an incredibly costly endeavor, with each launch in the 1960s amounting to over $185 million. This exorbitant expense rendered the prospect of relying on such a colossal booster for regular cargo resupply or crew rotation to a moon base economically unfeasible in the long run. Although there was a political desire to establish a long-term human presence on the moon, NASA's capabilities and mission architecture were ill-suited for sustainable exploration during that period. The technological approach that led to the success of the Apollo missions became a hindrance when it came to developing a continuous lunar program. As a result, NASA found itself in a predicament where it had to rely on Apollo hardware that was ill-suited for ongoing lunar operations. This lack of suitable equipment and infrastructure discouraged the agency from pursuing further lunar missions, as they were hindered by the limitations of their current resources. Additionally, at that time, the development of new heavy-lift vehicles that could launch payloads more efficiently and cost-effectively was still years away. The concept of reusable space vehicles that could continuously transport astronauts and materials to the moon in a sustainable manner was still only in the early stages of being conceptualized and had not yet materialized into tangible prototypes. Moreover, it is important to note that the Apollo command and lunar modules were not designed to function independently as reusable shuttles for transporting cargo or crew. These modules were only intended for short excursions and were not equipped for sustainable outpost logistics. NASA's expertise and resources were primarily focused on one-time lunar expeditions rather than developing long-term transportation systems. Emphasis shifted to new destinations. Over time, goals like Mars, planetary flybys, Skylab orbital laboratory, and captured asteroids have undoubtedly generated buzz. And from all indications, these goals seem to promise bigger discoveries than repetitive moon missions. During the early 1970s, the initial enthusiasm surrounding lunar exploration began to wane as it became a routine endeavor. This prompted both NASA and the public to set their sights on venturing beyond low Earth orbit and exploring entirely new worlds. The concept of sending human missions to Mars, Jupiter, and other distant destinations started to take shape, capturing the collective imagination. Given the challenges and limitations associated with establishing lunar colonies, NASA strategists recognized the need to generate renewed interest and secure funding by highlighting even more ambitious goals. Numerous enticing possibilities emerged, each vying for attention and funding. Simultaneously, opportunities for exploring the outer planets also came into focus. Incorporating small probe-carrying platforms into larger spacecraft heading to Uranus or Neptune offered the potential for cutting-edge scientific investigations at a reasonable cost. Mars emerged as an obvious next target. Its relative proximity to Earth and its similarities made it scientifically intriguing and within reach. Early concepts for flybys and landings ignited excitement as they promised to unlock untapped discoveries on what could potentially become humanity's future home. Riding the wave of Mars fever, initiatives like the Mars sample return proposals gained momentum in the 1970s. Furthermore, there was the novelty of creating humanity's first permanent space laboratory, Skylab. Launched atop a Saturn V rocket in 1973, the orbital workshop marked the beginning of an era of extended missions and groundbreaking biomedical findings. The glimpses of long-duration space habitation sparked visions of establishing bases in the sky and beyond. The early 1970s witnessed a shift in focus from the moon to exploring new frontiers. Mars stood out as a compelling target, while opportunities to study the outer planets and establish establish a permanent space laboratory captured the imagination. Additionally, the idea of capturing celestial bodies for study presented a novel and cost-effective approach to unlocking the secrets of the solar system. NASA advocates also championed the idea of capturing asteroids or comets and returning them to lunar orbit for easy study. These planetary plum pudding missions held the promise of unveiling insights into the origin of the solar system, all conveniently available right on NASA's doorstep and at a significantly lower cost than developing new lunar surface equipment. With a wide range of captivating paths available to push the boundaries of exploration, the moon's potential for scientific discovery began to appear less significant. Gradually improving the maneuvers of the Apollo missions carried the risk of yielding underwhelming results. Instead, leaders recognized the value in forging entirely new frontiers in technology and science that were within reach. Thus, in the post-Apollo era that demanded transformation, the quest to uncover signs of life on Mars or study other celestial bodies expanded the realm of possibilities. By capitalizing on human imagination, NASA garnered invaluable support that solidified its future as a pioneer in the age of discovery, spanning not only our solar system but also extending beyond, unleashing the potential of human civilization among the vast expanse of stars. Under the guidance of NASA Administrator James Fletcher, resources were gradually redirected towards ambitious Mars flyby probes, as well as the development of the space shuttle and orbital infrastructure. While the moon remained a destination to be reached eventually, efforts to establish a permanent human presence there took a backseat as public and political support shifted towards more daring ambitions. Engaging in repetitive missions to the lunar surface could no longer compete with the allure of venturing into the uncharted territories of interplanetary realms. NASA found a renewed sense of purpose in pursuing these awe-inspiring goals on the frontier as the nostalgia for the Apollo era began to fade. Development of the space shuttle changed the course from the moon to low Earth orbit. Following the conclusion of the Apollo missions, NASA found itself in a state of uncertainty and doubt about its purpose and future direction. The lack of a clear mission resulted in a decline in public support and a decrease in budgetary funding, putting the agency in a precarious position. In order to justify its continued existence and secure the necessary resources, NASA proposed the creation of a revolutionary reusable space transportation system, which eventually became known as the Space Shuttle. However, the development of such an ambitious and groundbreaking program came at a great cost. Throughout the 1970s, NASA had to allocate a substantial portion of its dwindling budget and divert a significant amount of its intellectual capital toward the development of the space shuttle. This meant that other important goals, such as a return to the moon, had to be put on hold or sidelined due to the limited resources available. While human spaceflight endeavors like Skylab managed to keep the spirit of exploration alive, the space shuttle offered a glimmer of hope, as it had the potential to revolutionize space travel and significantly reduce costs compared to traditional disposable rockets. This was particularly attractive at a time when affordable access to space was seen as crucial for the long-term sustainability of space exploration. During the era of the space shuttle in the 1980s and 1990s, NASA achieved significant milestones such as regular orbital flights and satellite deployment, which sparked a renewed interest in space exploration. However, the shuttle's limited capacity for carrying payloads prevented any immediate plans for human exploration of destinations like the moon, Mars, and beyond. Consequently, NASA had to prioritize affordable access to low Earth orbit, sacrificing its ambitious plans for venturing further into the cosmos. It was not until the early 2000s, following the retirement of the aging space shuttle fleet, that NASA could actively focus on rebuilding its heavy lift capabilities. Programs like the Space Launch System were initiated to develop new rockets capable of carrying significant payloads. Remarkably, it has taken over 40 years since the Apollo missions for space agencies to begin constructing rockets that are suitable for sustained lunar return, as seen with the Artemis program. Throughout this period, NASA extensively researched and explored various concepts, such as lunar orbiting space stations and Mars flybys, that would have utilized the capabilities of the space shuttle. However, due to the absence of heavy-lift launchers capable of deploying the enormous hardware required for such missions, these concepts remained confined to the realm of planning and failed to make any substantial progress. In summary, the space shuttle era witnessed witnessed remarkable achievements in terms of orbital flights and satellite deployment, which generated a renewed interest in space exploration. However, due to the shuttle's limitations in carrying heavy payloads, NASA had to prioritize affordable access to low Earth orbit, sacrificing its ambitious plans for lunar and interplanetary exploration. It was only after the retirement of the Space Shuttle that NASA could focus on rebuilding its heavy lift capabilities, ultimately leading to the development of new rockets capable of sustained lunar missions. The Space Shuttle's chosen development trajectory had far-reaching effects that significantly hindered any future attempts to send humans back to the moon for many years. Back to the moon with Artemis. The ambitious project called Artemis, which is dedicated to sending humans back to the moon, has been under development for quite a while. NASA's plans to establish a manned lunar station had been put on hold for an extended period of time. However, the emergence of private space companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin as competitors sparked renewed interest in initiating a new lunar mission, prompting NASA to resume the Artemis project in the 27th. This decision was largely influenced by Elon Musk's announcement that his company would launch the first rocket capable of reaching the moon the following year. The real excitement and anticipation surrounding the Artemis project is expected to reach its peak when the manned Artemis II mission touches down on the lunar surface in 2024. Scheduled to begin in 2024, the Artemis project holds the promise of marking the return of humans to the moon after a significant gap in lunar exploration. Nevertheless, concerns surfaced as the launches of the Artemis space shuttles faced repeated delays. Speculations even arose that NASA might once again withdraw from the project. However, on November 2022, an unmanned Artemis I mission successfully completed a journey to the moon, albeit with only moderate international interest. While reaching the moon was an awe-inspiring feat on a national scale, establishing a sustained human presence on its surface proved to be considerably more challenging than initially envisioned, both in terms of technological advancements and financial resources. Moreover, the political landscape had undergone significant shifts, imposing budgetary constraints on NASA that rendered a continued moon program unfeasible. Hence, it becomes clear that the decision to halt lunar exploration was not made lightly. NASA had to grapple with the immense complexities and limitations associated with establishing a long-term human presence on the moon. Additionally, external factors such as evolving political climates and budgetary restrictions played a significant role in shaping the agency's course of action. In conclusion, it can be said that although NASA achieved remarkable feats through the Apollo missions, the challenges of sustaining long-term lunar missions became insurmountable due to technological limitations, uncertainties surrounding the health risks involved, the absence of reusable equipment, shifting political priorities, and the financial burdens in the post-Apollo era. Thank you for watching this video. See you in the next one.